Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. The Washington Post has an article today which surprised even me with the level of climate fraud. They're getting completely shameless. 2 degrees C beyond the limit, extreme climate change has arrived in America by Steve Muffson, Chris Mooney, Juliet Alperin, and John Muskins, April 13, 2019. Lake Hopatcong, New Jersey. Before climate change thawed the winters of New Jersey, this lake hosted boisterous wintertime carnivals. As many as 15,000 skaters took part, and automobile owners would drive onto the thick ice. Thousands watched as local hockey clubs battled one another, and the Skate Sailing Association of America held competitions, including one in 1926 that featured 21 ice boats on blades that sailed over a 3-mile course. In those days, before widespread refrigeration, workers flocked here to harvest ice. They would carve blocks as much as 2 feet thick, float them to giant ice houses, sprinkle them with sawdust, and load them onto rail cars bound for ice boxes in New York City and beyond. Those winters do not exist anymore, says Marty Kane, a lawyer and head of the Lake Hopatcong Foundation. Now we're going to take a look at those claims. There aren't a lot of United States Historical Climatology Network stations in New Jersey, so I made a graph of all the stations in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania combined. And this shows the average daily temperature at those stations since 1895. The warmest year in those states was 1921, the coldest was 1917, and this year so far has been the second coldest year. The trend has been downward since 1895. The year mentioned in the Washington Post article was 1926, which was definitely a cold year. And it came 5 years after the warmest year on record in that region, 1921. The article made it sound like cold winters were normal in that region back around 1926, but there was a tremendous amount of variability, and the general trend has been downwards in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Now let's look specifically at winter nighttime temperatures in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. This is the percentage of cold nights at all the United States Historical Climatology Network stations in that region. 1926 did indeed have a fair amount of cold nights, but not as many as we had in 2014, 2015, and this year. The 1932 Winter Olympics were held in Lake Placid, New York, and they almost had to be canceled because there wasn't any snow in January. Los Angeles Times, January 16, 1932. Lake Placid, New York, January 15. Rain today wiped away the last vestiges of snow from this village's internationally famous bobsled course. New York, January 15. With a high temperature of 66 degrees at 4 p.m. today, New York enjoyed the third successive day of record January warm weather. This map shows temperatures in the east on January 14, 1932. The yellow dots are over 60 degrees, the red dots are over 70 degrees, and the pink dots are over 80 degrees. I don't think they were having ice fairs in New Jersey with a temperature well up in the 70s. The article tried to make it sound like cold winters were the norm in New Jersey in the past, but that clearly was not true. Now let's look at their claim that we don't get cold winters in the Northeastern New Jersey anymore. The first week of January last year was the coldest on record in the northeastern United States. Temperatures in many parts of the Northeast were more than 25 degrees below normal. On New Year's Eve 2018, they were very worried about people getting frostbite at Times Square. It was also record cold in the Midwest and in the southeastern United States. I flew from Denver to Washington, D.C. on January 7, 2018, and took some amazing pictures out the window. It was record cold out there, and the wind was dead calm. Without these fossil fuel-powered generating stations, a lot of people would have been dying. The windmills were frozen solid and completely motionless. This was my plane landing at Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. The Potomac was frozen solid. It was extremely windy in Washington that evening, and the wind chill factor was like 20 or 30 below zero. I went to a park and was taking pictures and nearly got frostbite. This is looking across the frozen Potomac. This is a list of the 40 coldest afternoons on record in the northeastern United States. 3 of them occurred last year during the first week of January. On January 6 last year, the average maximum temperature in the Northeast was 7.5 degrees, and no place in the Northeast made it above freezing that day. I bundled up in my full expedition gear and took a long bike tour around Washington, D.C. that day. As you can see, everything was frozen solid. There were people out ice skating on the reflecting pool. This is a leaf I saw frozen into the ice in front of the Capitol building. The Washington Post article is trying to make it sound like they don't get ice in the Northeast anymore. They're just hoping that people don't have very long memories, and there's very good reason why they printed the article in the summertime instead of during the winter. Had they printed it in the winter, people would have busted out laughing. This was looking across the frozen tidal basin. And there's my bike in front of the frozen Potomac. There's my bike again in front of the Capitol building. I saw people playing hockey out there. And this is looking across the tidal basin towards the Jefferson Memorial, frozen solid. And there's the frozen Potomac again with a plane coming in to land at Reagan Airport. Let's go back and look at the Washington Post article again, which was published yesterday. These winters do not exist anymore, says Marty Kane, a lawyer. Imagine that, lawyers and journalists just making stuff up. I found the missing Arctic ice last year. It was in the Potomac River. And then came spring in Philadelphia, which was the coldest on record. I had the misfortune of spending spring in Philadelphia last year. It kept snowing and snowing and snowing, and it was incredibly cold. Although I did like the contrast of the cardinals in the snow. It wasn't always cold in Philadelphia, though. Here's an article from July 22nd, 1907. Heat wave. There were 10,000 persons taking part in the Benevolent Society's procession at Philadelphia. Over 3,000, including spectators, were prostrated by the heat wave, which is passing over the city. There have been 75 deaths, and 50 persons are not expected to recover. The hospitals are full of sufferers. Many horses have been killed. Remember that Philadelphia is right across the river from New Jersey. In fact, many of the suburbs of Philadelphia are actually located in New Jersey. And the warmest January on record in Philadelphia was 1790. That was George Washington's first month in office, when the U.S. Capitol was in Philadelphia. A doctor in Philadelphia, Charles Pierce, kept very detailed records of the temperatures every day. Record of the weather in Philadelphia from January 1st, 1790 to January 1847. 1790, the average or medium temperature of this month was 44 degrees. This is the mildest month of January on record. Fogs prevailed very much in the morning, but a hot sun soon dispersed them, and the mercury often ran up to 70 in the shade at midday. Boys were often seen swimming in the rivers. There were frequent showers, as in April, some of which were accompanied by thunder and lightning. The unaccompanied mildness of the weather continued until the 7th of February. I don't think they were having a lot of ice fairs in New Jersey in January 1790 with the temperature at 70 degrees. January 1790 was the warmest on record, but a few years earlier was the coldest. This picture of Washington crossing the frozen Delaware is an iconic part of American history. So the message here is that winters in the Northeast are extremely variable. Some are very cold, some are very warm. The warmest was in 1790. I spent the winter of 2014-2015 living just outside of Washington, D.C., and March 7th, 2015 was an incredible sight. The Potomac was frozen solid. This is probably the first time that's happened in March since the 18th century. I took the dogs out for a hike on Chesapeake Bay on March 7th, 2015. Probably the first time anyone was able to do that in March in the last couple centuries. And the previous winter, 2013-2014, may have been the coldest on record in the northeastern United States. In fact, winters have been so cold in the Midwest and the Northeast in recent years that climate alarmists have started blaming all the cold weather on global warming, the polar vortex scam. This has been a fairly typical pattern in recent winters. Canada in the deep freeze, and a lot of the United States in the deep freeze too. There's a reason why the Washington Post put out this article in August, because they're hoping that their readers have very short memories and they just don't remember what was going on the last few winters. This year on January 31st, Illinois set their all-time cold temperature record of minus 39 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, they had 2 days in a row of all-time record cold. This was Chicago on January 31st of this year, and the Washington Post says, we just don't get cold winters anymore. Climate insanity is the norm at the Washington Post. This is one of my favorite articles from 2012 when they predicted cherry blossoms starting to bloom in January, back when people were ice skating in front of the Capitol building. Well, there's the cherry trees in January 2018. I didn't see any blooms on them that day. I did get to see the cherry blossoms this year in April. It was incredibly cold that morning, but it warmed up a little bit in the afternoon and wasn't too bad. The Washington Post is hoping that their readers aren't very bright and have very short memories, and that's probably true for most of them. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science, propaganda, and organized crime for a long time.